Well, I want to thank the panel for keeping precise time. Well done. So we've got lots to talk about. We've got upwards of 35 minutes. We'll follow the same system, sir, please, Ambassador. I just ask everybody to speak nice and loudly into the microphone, sir, so we can hear you.
Oh, I'm too short for this.
Here, he'll help you. He's tall.
Thank you very much for this occasion. And I'm tempted to take the floor because I've been referred to by Don Emmerson a couple of times. Let me first thank Canada, because you may not be aware, Canada supported the workshop process on managing potential conflict in the South China Sea for 10 years, from 1990 until 2000. And we have been cooperating a lot during that period. And a lot have been done since 1990. But let me just say a few things. First, we take an approach of start with what you can do. And for that matter, we decided 3 levels of problem. First level is technical, scientific, environmental issues. That's relatively easier to cooperate on. Second level is resources management, either living, mineral, oil and gas, and so forth. That is more difficult. Third level is territorial and jurisdictional issues. Those are the most difficult. And that depends a great deal on the parties concerned to do that. And therefore, in doing that, we concentrate a lot on technical matters, environmental issues, scientific cooperation, and so forth. And a lot have been done on that one. And next week, we are going to do a lot more on this one. On the resources management, we have formed a study group for many years on how to do joint development. And our difficulties have always been 4 points. One, where the area for joint development. Second is, on what? Oil and gas, management of resources, fish, and so forth. And third, by whom? By the states, or by companies, by corporation, and so forth. And the fourth one is how to do it, how to organize it, and so forth. And in the end, we encourage the countries concerned, the parties concerned, to do that on their own if they can make it. That's why we see, for instance, Malaysia and Vietnam are doing it, Malaysia and Thailand are doing it, China and Vietnam are doing that, and so forth. And that was a thing that we have tried to do, and we will continue to do it on this point. Now, my final point is, perhaps you will give me a few more minutes. Out of all this experience, in the last 20 years and so forth, I have made a 10-point suggestions to move forward in many occasions. And I would like to repeat it now here, because Canada has been very supportive for 10 years in the past for this kind of work. The first one is, we should continue to develop cooperative programs and encourage the parties concerned to solve their own problems, but at the same time, we develop confidence-building process. We continue to say, for instance, talking is better than fighting. That is one of the confidence-building process that we try to do. The second one is, a number of projects have been agreed upon, but cannot be implemented because government have not yet ready. And we encourage the government concerned to be ready to implement what we have agreed there. That will take time. The third one is, on territorial issues, we find out that not all South China Sea parties are part of territorial issues. I like to have a formula, for instance, among ASEAN countries, 6 non-claimants, like Myanmar, Thailand, or Cambodia, or Laos, and so forth. They are not claimants, they are not party to this. Only 4 which are parties to this. That is Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, and Brunei. And therefore, my suggestion would be that ASEAN chairman should encourage the 6 non-claimants to sit down with the 4 claimants and the 2 non-ASEAN, or 1-1 ASEAN, non-ASEAN, that is China and Chinese Taipei, we call it in our own formulation. Now, the 4th point is that we should continue to accelerate the process of COC, Code of Conduct. We should appreciate China in this context because from unwillingness to talk about it, now they are beginning to talk about it, although they are not in a hurry. And we would like to suggest China not to be too slow on this one, but make a little bit bigger step so that we can conclude the COC at the appropriate time.
Ambassador, can
The
I
5th
ask you
one
to,
is
Ambassador,
that
can I ask you to
countries should settle their own dispute.
Can I ask you to just distill this, just because we've got
Yeah.
people behind you. I know there's lots.
The
to
relevant
distill.
ASEAN countries or the rest should settle their own dispute. The next one is every country should clarify their points. We have not been able to find out the clarification on this one. The next one, the informal process should go on, and we should continue to talk about this and so forth. Now, I have so many suggestions to make here, but I know the time is very limited, and therefore, I'm just trying to thank Canada for supporting the process for 10 years in the past, and now we continue to do on this process. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hashim. I might draw your attention to the fact that Hashim Jalal was the Indonesian ambassador to Canada, the co-chair of the South China Sea Working Group, as he just suggested, Indonesia's roving maritime ambassador for maritime affairs, so a renowned expert, one of the great iconic figures in terms of the South China Sea. I have 2 issues to put to the panel. It's Jim Boutillier from Maritime Forces Pacific. One relates to history. I was trained as a historian, but I am increasingly uneasy by references to the legitimation of claims on the basis of history. My own feeling is that this is fundamentally insupportable in the South China Sea, and there's nothing, with the exception of possible historic bays in the UNCLOS regime, which would give support to historical claims. The second question is somewhat more theological, and that relates to ratification. One of the challenges, of course, is that some states have ratified and others have not, and the United States is widely criticized for its failure to ratify UNCLOS. But if we look at the case of China, we see that the ratification process is hedged about with a series of caveats, to the extent that one wonders whether the very spirit of the International Convention can any longer be sustained. So it's true that the convention has been ratified, but the application of domestic law overriding international law has the effect of neutralizing that ratification process. And I'd be interested in your observations.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Who would like to field the first? History. No?
Yeah, well, thank you, Dr. Boutillier, about a history question. I think I have to jump up because I think China is the one who always claimed that we have reached abundant, evident historical support. But I would rather argue that, well, history is important, but it's important in the context of within the framework of international law. As Jim pointed out, for countries to claim sovereignty of a particular features, then you have to fulfill a lot of conditions like discovery, prescription, and critical depth, etc. Why China is emphasizing the history is not because we only rely the claims of the partly based on the historical data. So although we like to emphasize we are the first discovery and the first to occupy and also exercise successive administration, but it's all these points has been made under the customary international law. So I'm not a historian either, but if I could refer you to a lot of, although there was one English monography about the history of the South China Sea in accordance with the particular requirement of sovereignty, equality, particular issues. And I think that would maybe help to understand why China is emphasizing historical evidence, but it's within the framework of international law. I think that's the first question.
Sure. Colonel, do you want to field a bit of that?
If I can respond to the second question asked by Dr. James Buttilia, with respect to China, though China has ratified UNCLOS in 1982 as early as 1994, after it came enforced in 1992. Why? China continued to flex its muscle within South China Sea to ensure that coastal state, small state, recognize China is a regional power. I'm thinking from my perspective. Okay? China, we compare the maritime powers in terms of aircraft, in terms of ship, vessel, definitely bigger than other coastal states in South China Sea, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia. In March this year, China PLN Navy went around to show to the coastal state, I'm in power. In short, in bracket, and stop at one of our area, James Shore, which is about 88 nautical miles from beach of Sarawak. What do? I agree with Dr. Mark Valencia said, do nothing, because it's merely passing through our waters. It does not create any what they call problem. Part of their study, that's what they argue. So China wants recognition from the coastal state, I'm in power, I have the power, and you are a small state, you keep quiet, like Professor Dom Emmerson said, keep quiet, as far as China is concerned. Thank you.
Okay. Sir, please.
Yes, Alex Butterfield, U.S. Pacific Command, with two questions for Dr. Nong. If negotiation, as your brief suggests...
Can you just speak into the mic a little?
If negotiation, as your brief suggests, is China's preferred methodology and indeed the most popular methodology for the other claimants, since Chinese maps now include the South China Sea as de facto sovereign territory, since Chinese passports and visa now include the South China Sea as sovereign territory, since the Sanshao Prefecture has been given jurisdiction over the entire South China Sea, or 97% of it, what is precisely negotiable?
Thank you. So two questions, so I understand that it will be in one. And well, first of all, I'd like to clarify a little bit. When we saw a couple of maps showing the U-shaped line, and you see either a dot line or dash line, but actually we look at the official map in 1947, it's actually a combination of a dot and dash, which is a boundary line. So for the U-shaped line, I think your question related to what is the legal status of Chinese claim on the U-shaped line. I think back in 1932, when the map was firstly drawn, it actually showed a location of those features within this line belongs Chinese to territory sovereignty. And then we refer to other requirements like first discovery, occupation, and administration to consolidate China's claim. And within this line, I have to clarify, China never claimed its historical water or territory water. China has never claimed that the water within the usual line is the historical water. It actually will, when based on the sovereignty issue, and then because China is a ratifier of the 1982 convention, then we will claim under the EEZ regime or Canadian regime for some particular features which meet the requirement of Article 121. And then in addition to that, in some overlapping areas, and China actually claims it enjoys the historical right, which is a shared right, or it's not an exclusive right with other countries, it's a shared right. And then about the negotiation, what is negotiable? I think that's a very fundamental issue that firstly, we have to admit there is the territorial dispute. And then we have to also admit and also to negotiate what is the legal status of those features which particular country are occupied. And then we need a lot of scientific experts to define, to go to the site and to test whether there's fresh water, whether it's able to sustain human habitation or develop economic. There's a lot of to negotiable. And if you look at the history between China and other countries, either on the maritime delimitation between China and Vietnam, which a very successful example. And also China has made a lot of land boundary through negotiation with its neighboring countries. And I have to admit that China actually compromised a lot in the land boundary negotiation. So I think still it's quite promising for the future for negotiation approach by China. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you for that clarification. My second question is this. One of your slides said since 2009, China has practiced a policy of passive response. In light of the forced blockade of Philippine attempts to reinforce their garrison at Second Thomas Shoal, in light of the forced landing on South Laconia Shoal and the destruction of their survey markers there in Malaysian claimed islands, in light of what appears to be President Xi's conscious decision to bully Vietnam as an example to other claimants with the deployment of CNOC 981 to the Vietnam EEZ, and then the forward deployment of arms into the Paracels as a contingency in case they had to strike Vietnamese cities. How can that be interpreted as passive response?
Thank you for your question. And I think to answer your question, I'll probably have to refer to some very specific examples why I refer to Chinese policy as passive. Well, for instance, in the East China Sea, I think China has not done anything before 2012, before the Japanese and tried to nationalize the Senkaku or Diaoyu Island. This is one example. And we're referring back to the state practices and the Spratly. I think in 2009, when Malaysia and Vietnam have the joint submission to the CLCS and also the separate submission by Vietnam, I think China has to do something because the Law of Sea Convention actually define that without all the consent or agreement from the claimant states and in the area where the dispute exists and the countries are not supposed to submit its information to the Commission of Limit of Canadian Shelf. This is one reaction. If I can take the Huangyan or Scapa Shoal Island, and I think, well, the Chinese fishermen and the Philippine fishermen has been always fishing there. They help each other in terms of like weather or natural disaster. They're helping with each other. But in April 2012, when the Philippine warships are in, I think that's the beginning or the cause for all this aftermath tension between the Philippines and China. And you also point to the example of the oil rig 981 by Snook. I think China has been very careful to locate that oil rig in Parasite rather than in Spratly. I think within the night the U-shaped line, there are about I think roughly like less than 1,000 oil rigs in the line, but in Spratly, among all these 50 oil rigs, and China is the only country or the only state which has not any one of its oil rigs in Spratly. In Parasite, why China locate the area, which is only 70 nautical miles to its biggest island, I think it's very concerned, very carefully to select this case to avoid any of these cautious, any of the anger for its neighboring states. And why the Vietnamese and claims that I think it's built on its Vietnamese policy. It claims that Parasite is a part of its territory, but in Chinese policy, Parasite is not actually a disputed area. So we carefully chose the location to develop our first oil rig in this region. And it's not a new action, has been going on for 20 years, but it's selected May at the start of the oil reconstruction because of the consideration of also there before the typhoon season as well. So it's not really a new thing. Thank you.
Jim, I hope Nong got a very nice hotel room here. She's done a lot of the speaking throughout this performance, which is to be expected, but I hope she was upgraded. Don, please.
If I could, China is an opaque country. Outsiders are reduced to guessing. I mean, just to give you one example, we do not even know the specific countries to which China provides foreign aid. That's just one example. This is an opaque place. Now, as an outsider, together with other outsiders, I try to compose the most plausible or the least implausible explanations for Chinese behavior. And I'm not saying that this is accurate. Precisely because China is opaque, it is really almost impossible to have an accurate understanding of Chinese objectives. Ultimately, the question is, what does China want? Does China want deference? Does China want dominance? Does China want hegemony? Or, reversing it, does China want cooperation, negotiation? The answers to these questions are completely unclear, but I will say this, that there is at least a plausible explanation of a three-part strategy. One is ambiguity. The second is activity, the activity that you rightly referred to. You could have mentioned Scarborough Shoal. There are many other examples of what is sometimes in Washington called salami slicing tactics, which is a little bit unfortunate because salami is not widely eaten in China, or for that matter in Asia. And the third element in that strategy that I'm making up, I'm inventing, and it may be wrong, and I hope someone will correct me. Perhaps I'd like to be wrong, I don't know, unless the real truth is worse. The third element in that strategy is delay. The third element in that strategy is delay. Ambiguity. Hashim is right. He has been calling for clarity on the 9 or now 10-dash line for years and years. How many times have I been to an international conference, whether in KL, whether in Singapore, I don't know where, in Manila, in other places, and Hashim will raise his hand during the Q&A, and there'll be an ambassador from the People's Republic of China sitting on the dais, and Hashim will say, could you just explain what the 9-dash line means? That's all we want, just a little bit of an explanation. Now, my colleague says that it's clear. It is really simply the land features. It's not the sea space. But if that is the case, then why, year after year after year, have official Chinese representatives refused to clarify the line? You know, ambiguity is useful in foreign policy up to a point. The question to me is, at what point will ambiguity begin to have diminishing returns for Chinese policy? And at that point, perhaps they can accept Hashim's admonishment to be clear. But until that happens, I don't think it will. And activity you've already mentioned. And finally, briefly, delay. The COC has been mentioned. The Code on Conduct in the South China Sea, in my possibly incorrect opinion, is an entrenched mirage. It is an entrenched mirage. It's entrenched because people keep talking about it, and frankly, the smaller countries in Southeast Asia have little else to show in the way of an end point, a destination that would imply peace and stability and so forth, right? As a code of conduct. If everybody obeys a code of conduct, presumably there would be peace and stability, even though the code of conduct will not be enforceable, and even though it pertains primarily to rules of the road and not meaningful questions like sovereignty. And so China keeps postponing. China says, no, 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 we have to have consultations, not even negotiations, consultations on the Declaration on Conduct, which has been widely violated by many parties in the South China Sea ever since it was invented in 2002, and China signed it, and China then has continued to violate it, together with the others. I'm not limiting China, right? And so then if China is unwilling even to move forward on implementing and ensuring compliance with a DOC, then the COC becomes even more of a mirage, right? And frankly, I'll predict, will there ever be a COC? I doubt it very much. Because, and this is my last point, while this triple strategy is being undertaken of ambiguity, activity, and delay, China is massively increasing its hard power and its ability not to bother with international law and all of these restraints and simply take over the South China Sea. Am I being unfair to China? I hope I am. I very much hope I am. I am praying that I am being unfair to my friend and colleague and other colleagues from China. Tell me I'm being unfair.
Okay, there you go. Well done, Nong.
Good.
Okay.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. Thank you. I'm being unfair. I apologize.
Gentlemen, please. Yep.
Thank you very much, Simon Hughes from Canada. To just pull a little bit more on that thread, perhaps a more simple question, perhaps, I don't know about the answer, to Dr. Kraska. It was very enlightening for me to get a straightforward legal representation of UNCLOS in the area in particular, and I applaud you for using the least slides of anybody in the last 2 days.
Can you speak up just a bit, sir?
On the issue of land off someone's coast, a rock outcropping perhaps, and then the building of more land around said outcropping, not as a natural event, but as a man-made event. I wonder the legalities of that in terms of then making a future claim to greater rights around such a physical form which has been altered by man and not by natural causes.
The law is very simple on that, and that is that artificial islands and installations cannot be used of claim for sovereignty or sovereign rights over resources or jurisdiction. Coastal states are limited to a 500-meter safety zone, not a security zone, a safety zone to maintain safety of navigation around that feature.
Sir, please.
Well, I have two questions. Alexander Sheldon Duplay from France. The first one to James Kraska. You said that water was needed to justify an easy area around the island. But I would like to know how many islands you think it would be just limited to Ituaba? I mean, how many islands could open a claim to an easy zone in the South China Sea? So that is my first question. And my second question, which is to Nong and also to Mark Valencia, it's about the intelligence collection. China has now, apparently, according to Indian sources, embarked in intelligence collection in the Bay of Bengal, for instance, and also off Hawaii. So I understand that the very good point that the Chinese capabilities are not comparable to the U.S. capabilities. But obviously, China is in a situation which contradicts its own policy on the issue of military activities in the EEZ. So, thank you.
Okay, great. James, you want to start?
That's my belief that Ituaba is the only feature that is capable of sustaining human habitation. The test for fresh water is the most widely recognized or authoritative test. I suppose reasonable people may be able to differ on this, although if you look at the court cases, the International Court of Justice in particular, the court has clearly downplayed the importance of features, not giving them, even if they have water, not giving them a full 200-mile EEZ or even a 12 nautical mile territorial sea. So the features, I think, have been magnified in legal importance because they possibly have other value, strategic value, but legally they are much less significant. Also, can I add that, look, law is not, there's a million lawyers in America, and they're all not smarter than you, and law is not that difficult. The later in time prevails. So historic arguments and the 1958 conventions from Geneva on the law of the sea, all of that are replaced by the 1982 convention for those states that are parties to it. I think there's a lot of sort of obfuscation that kind of mixes the political and military and economic dimensions with the legal dimensions. The legal dimensions, there are some areas where reasonable people can differ, but the boundaries are fairly clear, and some arguments are just beyond the pale. They're not legal arguments.
Okay. Mark?
Well, thank you, I think, for the question. I wasn't quite clear what the question was, but the China's doing something in the Indian Ocean
In
or
the Bay of Bengal,
in the
the
Bay of
notion of
Bengal.
hypocrisy and Chinese practice as it relates to this.
Well, he in part answered this himself. I mean, that the capabilities that China has are at least 20 to 30 years technologically behind those of the U.S. So it's old-fashioned eavesdropping and looking and watching, listening. So eventually, I mean, as China's capabilities increase, then there will be stark hypocrisy in what it's saying and what it's doing. One of China's problems, as far as I can tell, is its public relations. It has, I'm sorry, Dr. Nong, terrible public relations people, particularly from the foreign ministry. They either are not familiar with the issues or don't explain them correctly, are very combative and arrogant in their statements. They could deal with many of China's maritime issues very well. They could make some very good arguments. I'm not saying they would prevail in a court, but they could make some understandable and reasonable arguments, and it's not for lack of knowledge circulating in China that they don't. I don't know why they do not do this, but they don't. And I've been saying this in China as well over and over again. So one thing you have to realize, I mean, seriously, take it from me, what China is saying is not that calculated, and it's they're shooting themselves in the foot half the time.
You want to?
I think, well, China is a coastal state and it's a user state. And I have to say that China does not object to military activities in EEZ, given some exception. China acknowledges that certain types of military activity is actually the freedom navigation, but there are some other exceptions. For instance, has to be, these kind of military activity, especially intelligence gathering, needs not to be danger or hamper the national security, and it should not have the nature of marine scientific research, which needs the consent regime from the coastal states, and also has to not to harm the marine environment in certain circumstances, because the advanced acknowledgement there's some certain type of military activities actually had those features that I just mentioned. I think that's why China is sometimes object to particular activities in EEZ, but in principle, it believes certain type of friendly military activity falls within the freedom navigation. Thank you.
James, sure. You want to take one? Yeah.
If I could just add just a couple of thoughts then on military activities in the EEZ. I know we're pressed for time, but as Dr. Valencia indicated, it's in Articles 87 and 58, all of the high seas freedoms, including freedom of navigation, as well as other, quote, internationally lawful uses of the sea, are imported into the exclusive economic zone so far as they don't affect the resources. So the idea of peaceful purposes is derived from the UN Charter in Article 2, Paragraph 4. So I don't think at a time when the United States had over 1,000 Navy ships in 1945, and the Soviet Navy was large, that it's reasonable to suggest that, that the fathers of the UN Charter envisioned that peaceful purposes did not include patrols and military exercises and intelligence collection in the global commons. You know, on the issue of marine scientific research, look, marine scientific research has a discrete definition in the Law of the Sea Convention. It is collection of information for the benefit of all mankind. So intelligence gathering is not for the benefit of all mankind. In the US, it's kept at the Fleet Numerical Oceanographic Center in Monterey, California, and oceanographers would love to open up that treasure trove, but they're not able to because that's classified information. It's not for scientific research, and therefore it's, it just doesn't come up within this consent regime of marine scientific research.
Well, Jim, it's noon, and we've had a lot of legal talk for 2 hours here, so I think we're going to wrap up this panel. So please join me in thanking the participants.